Together for David Cayton.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody, for the welcome. It's very nice to be back here. I've got a spare half dozen sick bags here, if anyone requires one. Actually, it's not too gruesome. Well, to me, I can perhaps get used to it, but I would like Doc Martin, blood, I feel funny. But most of these animals don't have any blood, so it's no problem. So I apologise in advance for people who were here last year because Neil wanted me to run into a bit of the mutilation stuff. So some of these images, some of you have probably seen before. So I'll try and skip through some because I've got an awful lot. My voice is going. Could I ask how many people here have watched Silent Killers, Richard D. Hall's Silent Killers? 3, 4, no, about half. Oh well, that's good, but forgive me if a slight overlap here and there with stuff in Silent Killers. so I sort of entitled this talk. I look back at how I kicked off and why did I choose this topic, and I think we could have the next slide. I'm just thinking. Oh, on small. That's it. So people may know I didn't actually work for Crest International directly, but I worked with Tony and Graham Birdsall. So I was appointed an investigator for Quest for Greater Manchester in '93 when I left British Aerospace. And after 3 years of interviewing people who had seen something in the sky and filing reports and what have you, I thought this is not going anywhere, because you only believe or disbelieve a witness who says they've seen something. So I was decided, partly influenced by Tony, but other people like Linda Moulton Howe, who had really brought the animal mutilation stuff to public notice. So I decided that maybe if you get hold of some animals with these things, there's something tangible on the ground which you can get a handle on and take into laboratories or hand these animals to professionals who could have a proper look and decide, whether it looks like the very unusual thing or not. So that's why I decided to embark on that. It's not a very nice or popular pastime or type of research of ufology, because naturally it's not very pleasant. And you're going up and down the country, the next one, thanks, looking for evidence, which is very hard to find, because often a farmer finds some dead animal, which is odd. He'll either bury it or scratch his head. He very rarely would call the vets, because that costs him more money to throw after, his loss of his animal. So anyway, I did plough out a few farms and got nowhere, and I thought I'll have to do something to try and get notice. So I compiled an advert, an appeal advert, to put in the farming press. I don't know whether, I think we've got one here. Oh, past the, that'll do anyway. Anyway, I put this farming notice in, and I'll come on to Professor Fremont in a moment, but he agreed and thought it was a good way forward because months elapsed and I didn't hear anything. So I compiled this advert and listed the animal symptoms or type of injuries so the animal owner or the farmer could recognise what I was looking for, so I wasn't going to waste time driving up down the country to find something dead through natural causes or animal predation, which is in a way a natural cause. So that's what I did. And I got quite a good response from that, which was the Farmers Weekly. It cost £300 for a 1 week advert, which is 2 columns in the classified section. I think I should have a picture of the... Oh no, this is Tony Fremont, from Professor of Pathology at Manchester University, and I came to meet him through a bit of luck really. BBC Radio Manchester on the breakfast show were discussing 7 o'clock the morning after Channel 5 and other media had screened the alien autopsy footage film. So the BBC, in their wisdom, decided to ask Tony Fremont and a colleague to view this film and see if, and come into the studio the following morning to see if the procedures you see in the brief, grainy, black and white clip was kosher or not. So I got in the studio, sat across a round table, microphones. There's 2 lady presenters at that time, and we didn't know each other, so he put a little note and said, "Who are you?" And, "Oh, I see." Anyway, despite me telling I was there because Graham Birdsall, who had been asked for some reason, couldn't make it to Manchester. I'm like 12 miles down the road, so he said, would I stand in and speak as a ufologist for Quest and give a collective opinion about why we thought the alien autopsy was a scam and not a real alien body. So that's how I came to know it. Anyway, when we came out of the studio, I asked him if he could prepare to help what I was doing, and he said yes he would. Yeah, he'd be prepared to look at small amounts of tissue, etc. So right, I think another one. Oh yes, that report he was looking at was a NIDS report of a cow mutilation in the US, which had this typical eye orbital area sort of machined out around the eye socket as well as the eye, and that's what he's looking at. We'll see one of those later. Okay. So the alien autopsy did me a good favour, and the BBC presenters thought I was going to say, "Eureka, this is a smoking gun for ufology," and support Ray Santilli. And I was saying the opposite, so they were a bit crestfallen. So the heated discussion went up in smoke a bit because they were wrongly informed by the producer. Why, I don't know. So that was that. There's a picture of Santilli being interviewed at the time, and he charged media around the world lots of money. They pay him, but they couldn't release this film until a date selected by him. So it was all a bit of a setup. Okay, Amanda. Now this isn't the actual body used in the film. This was built or designed and built, modelled by a firm called Twin FX in Canada, and they did it to sort of demonstrate how they could have done this sort of model to make it look like a real alien with the organs, etc. So there we go. Something else I'm going to say about that autopsy. Anyway, doesn't matter. So that was a damp squib, really. And it's amazing. I found it, 22 years or so on from the event. I think it was 1995. There are people around who are still trying to suggest this was a genuine alien body. And even Philip Mantle, who was one of the prime movers for at the time has since retracted and agreed that it was a fake dummy. But there we are. Anyway, Tony Dodd passed over to me, unfortunately he's passed over a number of photographs, which I had seen some of them before, and this is a typical cow mutilation, which was from Northern Ireland, near Newry, and there's a lot of activity around Newry area. So you can see the typical cut here, the udder's gone, rectum core, there's the jaw stripped, tongue out, etc. There's obviously birds been sitting on it, trying to pick bits off it, which sometimes happens. Sometimes animals and birds won't go near. So there we go. I'm sure I'm out of plunk. There we go. Only having these because occasionally there's a certain amount of data I forget about. So, okay, next one. This is another view of the same animal from the back end. The udder gone, rectal core. Okay. Simple to say, once you've seen one animal mutilation, you've seen them all. You certainly will after tonight. Fox. Now, this is often blamed as the predator which is causing the mutilations. Very clever foxes, they've got special surgical training. There's a special veterinary department in DEFRA where they can train up animals to do the mutilation. I'm being sarcastic, obviously. And it's got a hole in there. It's not a gunshot, and the brain's been extracted through the hole. Okay. Many farmers have said to myself and Phil Hoyle, "Oh, it's foxes." They just want a quick answer to put the thing, to bed and put their minds at rest. This badger is totally being eviscerated. No blood on the fleece and quite a neat cut line. Okay. 2 deer again with the same sort of similar holes as the fox in the head with the brain removed. Okay. Thanks. And even the old hedgehog has got a little hole there in its head. So it's incredible. Even mice, some mice have been done. Okay, I've got pictures of mice. Now this was a sheep. I went to a place called Lumberts near Tobberden, which again is a bit of a UFO area around Tobberden in Yorkshire. And the farmer there has had various incidents, not this was I think the first one. He promised faithfully to let me know, his name's Graham Hollows, if he had any more, and I found out John Wantling had been there recently and there had been more and he'd not let me know. Anyway, what intrigued me, I put 2 arrows on my thumb, and apart from the jaw strips, some very neat cutting around the edges, and these are I think veins or arteries which are not damaged, but a lot of material being removed from behind them. So that's clever stuff. It had a very strange smell, which when we got to it had gone, but it's a shared farm, and the lady and Graham said when they found the carcass they had this strange smell, a bit like hospital surgical stuff, Okay, that's by the way. Oh, this was a Farmer's Guardian. I did a bit later, but this is a sort of thing for people, animal welfare officers, veterinary surgeons, state managers, gamekeepers, and this is a list of things to look out for. My contacts. We decided not to put Tony Fremont's name on there for the time being because we weren't letting on who he was. Okay. Obviously, I knew when I'd sent this advert in, it would very quickly get from the advertising desk to the editorial desk, and sure enough, a fellow called Johan Tasker rang me up and said, "Oh, I'm going to do a story for the paper, for the magazine, which is a prestigious farming publication." So I sent him images and a bit of a blurb, and he cobbled together a 200-odd words story. But his features editor, David Cousins, have an next slide, declined it. He says he's had a chance to study the report. It certainly makes disturbing reading, but I feel it's a little too sensational for our readers. If definite proof could be found, we'd certainly be interested in running something, but I guess it's some way off. Which, of course, turning with photographs on blah, blah, blah. Now, considering the farming magazines are supposed to support the farmers with problems, and they had an avenue to put something out, but of course probably notices out on this to editors on this topic, and it was declined. So, okay. Now, as a result of that advert, I was called to a farm north of Welshpool. It's called the Red House Farm, and the farmer said, "I've got a ewe here with a very peculiar wound." He dragged it out off a trailer, and at first glance I couldn't see anything wrong with it, and I thought I'd wasted my time. Anyway, because I'd read, I think it was Tony Dodd said to me, he'd heard that some of these animals that had been found, possibly the States, I don't know, were radioactive. Because of my job, retired, I had access to Geiger counters, and this thing is very sensitive to alpha, beta and gamma rays, so I just checked it over. Fortunately, there was nothing there, because I thought people are handling the animals, including me, so that's why I did it. Okay. Oh, you might notice here, looks like something's happened. Okay, next slide. And there's John. His name is John Farmer, actually surname Farmer. He lifted the fleece up to reveal this massive hole. You notice how clean the fleece is. There's no blood staining. So this was a puzzle to him. Why it wasn't, especially in the neck, bleeding to death, sort of thing. Okay, I think there's another picture of it. Oh, I put some annotations. Bloodless fleece. That's self-explanatory, really. Oh, and the left ear gone as well. Okay, another one. And here, showing the deep wound down to the vertebrae. There's a bit of blood pooling. There's always some blood left in the organs in the body, and it's standing, it drains down. But it wasn't very much. Okay. And then there's been a cut through a bone here as well. So I did manage to slice off a few edges, tissue to take to Tony Fremont to have a look at. But 48 hours, the deterioration, bacteria starts. So to do a sensible slice and histology, it makes it very difficult for him to spot anything unusual. So we're hoping to find out what had made the cuts. That was the idea. Okay, thanks. This is a farm in south of Shrewsbury, where the corpsman had 4 lambs, and out of the 4, this one had nothing wrong with it, except just by sheer luck I was sort of sweeping the fleece back and found this little hole here, which is a few millimetres, but only down to the skin. And then I turned it over and found there was an identical hole on the opposite side of the head. So I am thinking there's something attached to the skull which has caused the death of the animal. Electric shock or whatever, I don't know. Okay, Andrew. And then I carried on down to Oxfordshire, where there's 2 lambs there, and the farm, it's a hatchery actually, a well-known hatchery. Sometimes sees trucks on the road, on the M6, and whatever. In this place called Cayton, near where the Thames Valley is, south of Witney a few miles. And this lamb had been decapitated. Okay, another view of it. Andrew, okay, thanks. This is a side view, and there'd been a neat cut through the vertebrae and what they call the IV joint. And then the heart and liver had been removed from this hole, from the animal. Okay. Another one at the same farm in Oxfordshire. I'm sorry, no, this is back in the Shropshire farm, which is what was around. Eye missing, the ears are down to the scalp. I think the tongue was there. Yeah, I think it was. So, okay, next. And this is the other one of the 2 of the pair from Oxfordshire. And the farmer said about a week, 10 days before, he'd had another lamb with the same thing, with the snout cut off. Again, the eyes out, ears off. Virtually no blood. If you just bear that in mind, because I'm going to show you another animal more recently in Spain. With that, okay, so another slide, Andrew, thank you. This is another view across where the cut is. And Tony Fremont looked at this and said, this is the back of the tongue, and he was amazed how cleanly, his words, that it was transected. So, in fact, I ended up with 6 lambs coming back in my car boot, took them home, took them one at a time into the conservatory to take photographs, which my wife wasn't that pleased about it. And then the following morning I took them to the university, and I used up all the available formalin or formaldehyde they had in the department, where they have to sort of stew them to preserve them for them to do any work. So that's Tony Fremont for you. Brilliant chap. Okay, next one. Oh yes, he said to me, this is what he said, and he didn't write a full written report, I have to say. It was just a typewritten note without any heading on, because he was careful not to issue paperwork which identified it from the university. So even though he was senior at the top, he had to watch his P's and Q's a bit. So he said, as you read, all the animals, that's the 6 lambs, were dead before mutilation, but no obvious cause of death. So I said to him, how do you know to come up with that statement? So next slide, thanks. He prepared this slide for me, which was a transaction here of dead tissue, and this is live tissue, and you can see what he refers to as bleeding into the tissue. This was human tissue, incidentally, but it didn't matter. It just does the same thing with an animal or human. Okay, thanks. And then down in Wiltshire one year, I bumped into Linda Moulton Howe, and I knew of her work, obviously, and we had a book of files from her images on, and we sat in Rob Hulse's car boot outside the Silent Circle Cafe at the time and went through them, which was of great interest to her. So we sort of kept in touch and shared a bit of information. So again, she was a person who, although I think she's gone off the rails a bit recently on certain topics, particularly like crop circles, but never mind. She's certainly really bang on the nose with the animal stuff, and was the original, I think, person to bring the whole business into the public sector from her work she did in the States, and an award-winning documentaries, because she was an investigative journalist who was interested in environmental things, and it caught her eye about the mutilations. Okay. So some of the things she did impressed me. I know it's a small image, and I'm sorry about that. See if you can blow it up. But if it's, anyway, this cow, they found it, and it obviously been dropped from a height, because you can see in the mud here, or the ground, there's the front legs, the body, and the back legs had made an impression in the ground. So that's obviously been dropped from a height. Hasn't just keeled over in the field. Okay, thanks, Andrew. Yes, okay, yep. The other thing that impressed me, she got, it's all right, I'll leave it on. There's various tissues of hide and skin, and it was noticed by one pathologist she was using, this serrated effect. If you go to the next slide, Andrew, I think there's a closer view of this sort of effect here. So it makes you wonder what sort of instrument or tool has been used to cut that. And the cow itself, or the animal, had the normal, typical injuries, like, the jaw stripped, tongue out, rectal core, genitals interfered with, etc. Okay, thanks, Andrew. Another example with the little jaggy edge. Yeah, okay, I'm not keeping pace with my. It doesn't matter. I'm shooting from the hip here. Now this is very interesting. This was from Linda Moulton Howe. It was on Earth Files, her website, way back. And this cow in Alabama was found with it was a female with obviously udder removed, rectal core, and I think it had the jaw thingy and all these branches. And I didn't put it in, but there's a slide, a vertical slide showing the top of the trees smashed off with branches that come down with the cow. So this cow had been flying. I know pigs fly sometimes, but cows. And then they found something more startling. Okay, on to the next one, which impressed me with Linda's work. They found these little particles on the hide, and these are pure hemoglobin. Okay, and to extract the hemoglobin from a blood sample, you need a centrifuge, and there's a lot of processes to be done in a laboratory with equipment that you can't hump about in the field. And they left these little bits on the animal, and there was a bull. I can't remember where in the States it was, but it's the same thing. Little bits of fragments of hemoglobin. Okay, there's that picture. This is a graph done. This is the reference. What's it called? Andrew, anyway, this is the pure hemoglobin. So this was the bull sample and the cow you've seen from Alabama, and how identical they are in the composition. So that sort of clinched it. It was, in fact, hemoglobin. Okay. So these are the sort of things that Linda's done in the past, which really impressed me. This was another case which the photograph's very poor, and very often the rancher or the farmer takes the image, and I fiddle around with it to try and improve the image, but the bull had been emasculated, and where the testicles were, there's a big hole. Well, the cow's penis, I didn't realise how long it was, and it comes out somewhere down here, and this is the penis, and it's been withdrawn from the inside, then passed out through the hole made by the testicle removal. So the foxes, you see, they're really good. I'm impressed with these foxes. Okay. So there we go. Now then, we're up in, this is in Barton Hall, Preston. It's a place called Garstang, which is north up the A6, the old A6, from Preston a few miles. And I got a very 1998, which is about 3 weeks after I put the Farmer's Weekly advert in. And just note the board at the time was MAF, which is the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Fisheries. And Tony Blair reorganised that department and produced DEFRA. So they've changed the board since. And then you notice this crops up, VLA. A lot of veterinary practices are affiliated directly by the VLA, which is directly part of DEFRA. So I'm making that point because as we go along, you'll see how a lot of vets have deliberately kept information from the animal owner because they're part of the cover-up. So there are people around. Anyway, I got this phone call on the mobile, 10:30 in the morning. Have the next one if you like. And it was a lady. She didn't identify her name. She just said, "I'm calling from the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Fisheries from Preston." That's all she said to identify where she was. And she immediately launched into, having checked she got the right person on the phone. She was quite bullish and cross and said, you've no right to be taking animals and doing unofficial experimentation upon them. So I said, well, I'm not doing experimentation on them. If a farmer decides he wants to pay a veterinary practice to have a post-mortem done, what's wrong with that? And she said, because of BSE. So I said, hang on, are you telling me we've got a BSE problem with sheep? And she went a bit quiet for a moment because the bloody ministry knew there was problems in spinal cords in sheep, but this had not been made public at the time. And then she demanded to know the name of the professor of pathology, and I declined because we were keeping him secret because this sort of intervention she was referring about. And then she said, early on in the conversation, I skipped a bit, which shook me to the core. She said, and her exact words are, "Is this to do with the aliens? Not that we know anything about that." She did. She did. That was absolute gospel truth. I wish I'd recorded that message, but that's what she said. And this is inside of Barton Hall. So one time I was coming back from holiday with the kids in the car. I just ignored the private notices and drove up to the yard. And I got another shot nearer the buildings, and I saw through the window people were about to head out to challenge me who I was and what the hell I was doing, in the car park in the front. Okay, so we decided, it's Tony again, lovely chap, to have a little get together at my house, and Tony and Professor Fremont came and joined us. This is a clip from the film, the BBC film I can show you. And Tony brought down with him all the images he had, a book of Linda Moulton Howe's to show Tony Fremont. And he was interested enough, and we had a nice chat. And then the next slide, I think. What really grabbed Tony Dodd at the end, fished out a brown envelope and took out these 7 images of this poor chap from Brazil in 1988. Now this really stirred up Tony Fremont because he's a human pathologist, not a veterinary pathologist, and of course he saw this and the other pictures which I'll show later on. And he sort of muttered the words under his breath, but how low so we can hear it. I had a tape recorder running by their agreement, but can I find that damn tape? It's open reel tape. I can't find it. But he said, I can't see how we could do this. I could be flippant and say, well, you want to get a crash course from the foxes, they'll tell you how to do it. Okay, so he agreed to help me. Now then, Graham Birdsall, I wrote a piece up for Graham on a case up in County Durham near Consett, and one down in Staffordshire. And this is Alison Nicholson, the dog, and me and the camera crew. It was wet, so we went into the barn where she brought a sheep in. Now, 2 or 3 weeks before, when she read the advert, she disposed of the animal. So what happened is, I'll tell you now later. Anyway, she found the dead ewe, died in giving birth to the lamb. So it was stuck in the vulva, the lamb's head was sticking out when the mother died. So it was late in the day when they found it, so they thought we'll go back in the morning with the trailer and bring it in to the barn to dispose of and bury or whatever. And she was horrified to find, and I'll point out, she lectures in sheep husbandry at an agricultural college in Newcastle, or County Durham anyway. So she knew what she was talking about. So the head of the lamb was now missing, and that shocked her to start with. And then the sheep, the ewe, had from the hot, which is the knees, stripped down to the bone, up to the sort of top of the body. It was like the sheep was wearing 4 sets of woolly socks, so it was all 4 legs, and with a very neat cut line around the periphery. So that's what she was saying to us. So can we run this film? Oh, before we do, just I ought to say, I didn't know the BBC had obviously seen this advert in the Farm and Press and contacted me to cooperate and help on this short film. So I said, well, there's 2 farms, so they contacted the farmer in Staffordshire, Neil Seaton, and Alison up in Cumbria, said, would you be agreed to be filmed and interviewed, which they did. And yeah, looks like it might play. I didn't know why they were doing it, and it turned out afterwards they're looking for bizarre topics to put in a programme to do with, this is 1999 now, a year on from the advert I put in, for a programme called The Big End, to bring in the new millennium, where people were doom-laying comments were made like, all the satellites will conk out, all the aircraft will be grounded, it's going to be a disaster moving into the year 2000. So they were this sort of thing. And then in London, they had Simon Mayo, I never met, was an anchorman who linked these various little documentary clips into this overall programme. And the pub they picked was called The World's End in Camden. I think it was on the Edgware Road, but it's in Camden anyway. And you'll see in a minute what a rude or stupid introduction. And he had 4 young ladies around the table. 2 were very Scottish from Glasgow. And he made inane comments to one lady about what we should do. She said, "Oh, I'd like to go to the rainforest." And he said, "What, in Camden?" Well, that's insulting, isn't it? Everyone knows there's no rainforest in Camden, but that's a silly thing he said. So then he said, well, hear what he says.
Okay, but first, we're just going over here for a second. Excuse me interrupting your drinking, but I've just got a question I'd like to put to you. Imagine just for a moment that you're an alien, beaming down to Earth. I'd like you to be in an alien's shoes. What would be the first thing that you would do?
I would probably be in Oxford Circus to shop my heart out, because I'm an alien that likes to shop.
Okay, so you go shopping. Any other ideas?
The nearest toilet, that's what I want to find.
You go to the toilet? Go spying maybe?
No, I'd like to go out to the rainforest.
You'd like to?
Go to the rainforest.
In Camden?
No, not in Camden. I don't want to be in Camden, I want to be somewhere else.
You want to go to the rainforest? Okay.
Rainforest.
Well, we have heard of an alien who, when it landed on Earth, nipped down to the local farm, cut a hole in a cow's bum, and sucked out its innards. It's true.
David talks shit.
That may be true, but still, if the choice is that or the local little chef...
British farmers have never had it so bad, what with the EU, beef on the bone and just about the whole of humanity against them. Now there is a strange new threat to their livestock. Eyes pulled out, stomachs missing, legs hinged off and heads cleanly removed. Some of Britain's farm animals have been bizarrely mutilated. Now, retired British aerospace engineer David Cayton is piecing together the evidence, and he's certain that these strange events are being caused by extraterrestrials.
We've got what they want, and they're coming and taking it without any permission or by your leave. And I think that's disgraceful and terrible.
I found this lamb to be 8 weeks old, with its head off, cut off without the head. Whatever had cut it off, it was a very, very sharp surgical knife. But the thing we were most impressed with, there wasn't any blood.
Take a walk on the wild side.
The skin and the flesh had all been removed from the side of the face, and it had been extremely cleanly done. There weren't even jagged edges around the skin. I've worked with sheep all my life and I've never seen anything like it before.
If a fox or a badger had done it, why hadn't they made a mess of it? And I'm certain foxes and the badgers don't carry a surgical knife around with them.
It makes it very hard to believe or understand how a person or another wild animal could do it. So that leaves you, the only conclusion, the only sort of avenue left is some intervention from very advanced people who have got the skills to do this.
To confirm his findings, Cayton sent his gruesome evidence for independent analysis. Some of the findings were beyond the explanation of science.
Some of the tissues that we found, we cannot explain how they've been damaged. So I think I would wish to keep an open mind as to whether or not this has been caused after death by a human, or maybe by some other agency.
We're going into space and bringing stuff back. Well, why shouldn't other beings in space come to us and take stuff back?
They're after certain genetic material, and they need tissue and organs, maybe the blood. They certainly seem interested in the reproductive side because they've got their own cloning program. The others are excised, and the teats are removed. The males animals are being castrated and the testicles removed very, very neatly, not sort of crudely slashed off.
To collate further case histories, David Cayton placed an ad in the Farmers Weekly magazine.
It was a pleasant surprise actually to find your advert in the Farmers Weekly, because up until then, who would I have told about this sheep?
However, not everyone had reason to be so happy.
Within 3 weeks of our appeal, I had this rather officious call from the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Fisheries, and I concluded at the end of that phone call they were probing and had an agenda. They were certainly wanting to know how we were getting on, whether we were getting close to what they knew, and they were wanting to know if we'd retrieved any animals and got some positive post-mortem results which would worry them. So I think I've ruffled a few feathers in official circles, or fleeces perhaps.
The official response has been a polite no comment. The majority of these incidents have been reported to the police as very serious offences. It is not for the Ministry to pass comment on these incidents, as they are being handled by the relevant authorities.
And that reminds me, I must put the cat out when I get home. You're watching the Big End.
I remind you, I must put the cat out. He's doing the wrong thing. He should be bringing the cat in. I'm putting it out, but there you go. Anyway, they another slide. That's a slightly wider view of the next one. Yeah, thanks. So they left a lot of things out, and the lady assistant producer who I ferried around to the farms, she was from Sri Lanka. Shiroma Silva was her name. So she was on a short 6-month contract with the BBC to build up her CV, you know, as a TV producer, because if you work for the BBC, that's good. And she was marvellous. And we shot a programme which she did a bit of editing. It was 10, nearly 12 minutes. And then she was furious because the series executive producer cut it down to 5.5. And of course she had no control what they were going to do with it, really. So we missed lots of stuff. But it wasn't bad. And it went out, amazingly, on BBC One at 9 o'clock in the evening as part of this programme. And it was repeated twice. So I suppose I can't complain. Anyway, okay, Andrew, I can give you... Oh, Tony Fremont. They interviewed him for an hour in his laboratory. I wasn't allowed to be there when they did that. And he appears for, what, 15 seconds. But at least he chose the right words that he could do about it. Not this, or not that, not predation. It could be some other agency, which was a nice sort of open-ended hint. The agency might be off-planet, but without digging himself a hole by saying that. So I thought that was good. Now, this advert, the BBC phoned the MAF, tried to get a spokesperson to meet me and be interviewed at their Barton Hall labs, and they refused. So the press office, Stuart Dobbs, sent this. Now this is quite a significant breakthrough in itself, because Tony Dodd previously had written to the Ministry of Ag asking about the animal mutilations, and you know, they denied all knowledge. They know nothing about it. So here we are, the series, and implying I've changed this to, you know, emphasise certain key words here. So that was obviously more than one. The series, majority of these incidents reported to the police, and bear that in mind, and dealt with them, the police, and they are passing on and handled by the relevant authorities, who he assumes the police. So I think Stuart Dobbs probably had a roasting from his bosses for putting that revealing statement out, actually, but I'll never know that. Anyway, okay, thanks, Andrew. Now then, I know you can't read all this from the back, but I had 2 letters which have been transcribed into type from handwritten notes. And this was a chap who was a pest control officer, a rat catcher if you like, who was friendly with his farmer in the Northamptonshire border with Oxfordshire, I think. And he had 2 dead sheep. He brought them in from the field. There was no blood, or rectum, sexual organs were missing, no blood. anyway, round hole of 4 inches, etc. You know, so anyway, he brought them into the barn. So the only people who know about that was the farmer, his wife, the stockman friend, and that was it really. 4 people. Later in the day, the farmer had to go on business to Leicester or Northampton. No, Leicester. Yes, that's right. My memory's right. And this BMW rolls up in the farmyard, and these 2 guys get out, and the stockman goes to greet them. They flashed green cards with MAF on, so he assumed his boss had authorised them to take the sheep. So he helped them in the car boot with the 2 sheep, and off they went. Farmer comes back, he said, "What have you done with the 2 sheep?" He said, the MAF came for them. I thought you arranged it, but he hadn't. Anyway, he was a bit cross, and he had a brother who was a police chief inspector, quite a good rank, down in Oxfordshire, and he asked to get your brother to get onto the MAF because they'd stolen effectively 2 of his sheep. Okay, they were dead, but they'd taken them without consent. So that was a bit of another story, and the police inspector was given the runaround over the phone, demanded to speak to another person who was higher up, and he was then threatened and said, if you don't drop the case, you will have problems with promotion, etc., presumably. So there you are, that's another example. Okay, thanks, Andrew. Oh, I just made a slide closer to the print, I've forgotten that. Okay. But there's a similar story coming up later about 2 horses, which he also told me about. So, right now, there's a young man called Sean Limbert who lived in North Yorkshire. Sorry, could you just... Okay, right. Yeah, it needs to just go back to that previous one, because Sean decided he'd like to help me, and he was a very proactive young man, young family. So he wrote to the MOD, giving an account of what I've just told you about the 2 sheep, compensation which they never get. We've told to keep out of the muffin by his superiors, and then Stuart Dobbs put out the press release to the film Big End. BBC reported to the police. So he's picking out the quotes, the salient points in this letter, which is now, the MAF is now DEFRA because it's 2001. And he says, this is Sean, if animals mutilated are being handled by the relevant authority, the police, why did a MAF official warn off a police chief inspector to keep out a MAF investigation? Could you tell me who is the relevant authority? Blah, blah, blah. So that's the gist of what he sent. The next one, okay. There's the letter. So there was an overall, if you want to, the next one, because he got a reply eventually, 12th of November, it took a long time. And he paid extra with the post office to get a signature for the person in the ministry receiving his communique, his letter, to prove that they got it. And they kept going missing. And he did it several times, paying out this post office fee to get a signature who's received your letter. Anyway, Elliot Morley is now in the hot seat. Nick Brown, former agriculture ministry. So he says, can you read it? Shall I read it out? Can you read that? Apologise for delaying the reply. We've been looking into the claims made in your letter that DEFRA, formerly MAF, were involved, Northamptonshire farmer, etc. You have alleged DEFRA official warned off a police inspector from investigating the matter further. I can confirm that DEFRA has not been involved in this investigation at any level. In view of the serious nature of these offences, I can also confirm that the police are the relevant authority. For instance, Fiona Walters, Animal Welfare Division A. So they've just, as they do, they pass the buck, they pass the ball to another government department to dodge having to reply to the member of the public asking the question. And that's typical. Okay, thanks, Andrew. Now, in 2001, I'd heard about a fellow called Philip Hoyle, who lives in Shrewsbury, still does, through a mutual friend, and said you should get in touch with Phil. And Phil, apart from being a lifelong abductee, runs his own little UFO group for abductees and does UFO research. And he was interested in the animal stuff, so we teamed up, and we had a bit of a meeting and decided to call ourselves the Animal Pathology Field Unit, which was Phil's choice. We had various options to consider. We thought that was the best title, which explained what we were doing, and we felt legit to add the pathology bit in because of Professor Fremont. So, okay, right, thanks a lot. And the team, this was a few years ago, and myself, Robert Hulse, Phil Hoyle here, and Mike Freebury. So, and that was the four of us at the time, apart from Sean Limbert, who was in North Yorkshire. Okay. So Phil and I did jointly quite a few investigations in an area of Shropshire, the Ray Valley, which is southwest of Shrewsbury, about 6 or 7 miles probably. But there seems to be a lot of occurrences. And the arrow at the top, this is the farm that I collected the 4 lambs I showed you earlier, and this is the valley. And this farm here, well, this was March 2002, and this is where the lamb was found. And the ear was missing, and often they remove the ear with the tag in for some reason, whether that's to, I don't know, but they don't take the tags. So on the ground at the next slide, I think there's that's one of the tags. Well, they're sealed up. Use some clamping device when they're put in, and you can't get them out of the ear without cutting the ear to bits, or using some tool to destroy the tag. So the clever foxes again, they got that off the bloody ear with no problem. Okay, so this is Phil. Now Phil's a very dedicated, thorough investigator. Okay, next one, and he's done a lot of work himself, because that area of South Shropshire and the Welsh borders seems to be an area of a lot of things happening, both UFO events and certainly animal problems. And this farm we went to several times actually, but Phil was on his own here, and the farmer rang him and said, "I've got a peculiar thing here. I picked up a lamb from the field." That's October 01, and in a matter of 5 days, this is the first picture, you notice this hole in the skull, where the skull was, and then it was rotting away to nothing. Even the wool disappearing to get the state. And there was this peculiar charring on the legs, and like a green dye substance. I think you see a bit of it there. So on occasions this happens, you get rapid total decomposition, in this case including bones, in a matter of 5 days. No, that doesn't happen normally. So, okay, thanks. We went together for this particular lamb. It had a biggish hole in its chest, cavity empty, rectal core, ears, an ear gone, eye, I think, okay. Next one, that's just a closer view of the rectal. It was a female. Quite a young lamb. Okay, next one. And then back on its thigh was this circular hole. If you just bear these in mind, because there's going to be a vet report in a minute, it makes references to some of these. Okay. And the tongue, and this is often the case, they're partially cut at the tip on a diagonal. Sometimes they're taken right back to the root of the throat, the whole tongue missing. And again, you'll notice a lack of bleeding. So the lamb presumably was not living at that time, otherwise if you cut your tongue, you bleed like hell, don't you? If you bite your tongue, okay. Eye, and both ears cropped to the thing. Okay, birds can, crows, and they can pick the eyes out of a dead bird. They even try young lambs alive, apparently. But Tony Fremont said this was absolutely clean, the edge. There was no, tearing or anything like that. Okay. Oh yeah, and then there's a texel plum. And I found these two small holes in the lower throat, as you see, 23 mil apart, and I think it's some points of where they managed to take the blood out and do the exsanguination. So there's been a little bit of bleeding just locally before the heart stops. But again, the pathologists say if you try and remove blood of someone bleeding to death, once the, I don't know, something like 60% of the blood's gone, the cardiovascular system collapses and the heart stops and you're dead. So it raises the question, how do they extract the other 40% of the fluid in the blood in the body? Foxes again, they're all sort of very skilled, these foxes. So that's okay. I think that was the last one of the actual animal. So the farmer said, "Oh, I want to get a vet's report on this. I want to know what's going on." And quite open-minded, he was a nice fella. And so he sends it off to his vet. And the vet is also part of the VLA. So in the full piece you can see it. So I'm sorry about the poor quality, necropsy findings. So they're mentioning the big hole in its chest, for which the thoracic and abdominal viscera had been removed. There was a further hole measuring 2.5 centimetre to the left groin. The right ear and half of the tongue was missing. Both eyes were missing. There was blood in the wool on the ventral neck and 2 puncture wounds measuring 2 to 3 diameter, about 25 mil apart. So they found the things I'd found to the right of the trachea. Beneath the puncture wounds and extending across the neck and distally to the sternum, there was extensive bruising and extravasation of blood. There was no blood around the holes in the chest or the groin. Beneath the hole in the groin, the muscles were damaged, consistent with being pecked. Now, he goes on to say the paranormal region was caked with dark feces. That's good. Thank you, Andrew, for doing that. And they were then criticising the feces stuck to the lamb and make comments that it was in poor bodily condition and clearly been scouring. If there are numbers of suggest a treatment, it cost him £31.80p, and they ended up criticising the farmer's husbandry, and they didn't even mention the rectal core. So that's a VLA vet for you. So they're obviously in the loop. There are certain vets around the country who are in the loop and under instruction from DEFRA to hide these events. So there we are. So he was very cross, the farmer. He just wasted nearly £32 to get him what we already knew, not the answers he wanted. Okay, thanks. Going a bit slow here. I've got to get through. No, it's not you. It's me. Rabbiting on. Oh, this is another, not a different lamb. Typical rectal core. I moved it close as I could, and you can see how neat this sort of like a machined hole, which it is in a way. So there we go. Next one. Another tongue example. I've turned it sideways because I thought it might go off the screen. Again, it's a diagonal cut across, completely bloodless, quite smooth. Okay, you have to be prepared to, if you're doing this job, to force open the jaws of an animal, especially if a rigor starts, to pull the jaws apart to check if the tongue's intact. It's all part of the job, Enjoyed it. Don't think so. Phil, again, is meticulous in his reporting, and this is an area where there was a lot going on, South Shropshire. It's night in there, and he's put little spots with numbers into a paper report of farms that have got these problems. So these bloody foxes get about. Okay, thanks. These are a couple of pictures from Phil, and he's put nice little arrows there to show the clean cuts around the edge of the jaw. Okay, thanks, Andrew. And another one, he's put little yellow arrows to show the smooth-edged, clean cut. Okay, and I think there's 3-4 shots of some of the jaw strips he found on. I think it was 2 farms, but they're all very similar. The jaw strips, okay. Yeah, slightly different. Okay. So after tonight, you'll soon recognise what to look for, so you can go out in the fields and get stuck in. There's another area where there's a hill here called Corndon Hill. Again, in the nearest town, this village is Hissington, and this farm here, where he's put the red spot actually, he's been to several times, and he set up a remote camera. Okay, I think that's one. This is one of the shots. He's put these little cameras in various farms, fellas. He spent a fair bit of his own money. You don't get any funding for this from EU, they're not very helpful, the EU. And this is a shot, this is a motion sensor, so the sheep's just triggered the picture. He's got another one, I didn't put it in, there's a fox walking past, just to prove the farmer's right, it's the bloody fox. I didn't put that in. Okay. That was 7th of July 2012. Okay. Now, thanks to Phil again, we heard of this horse, it's a place called Whitstone, I think it's North Devon, I've forgotten. January 2012, I've highlighted, Devon, Holsworthy, near Holsworthy. She was very angry at the local vet as he had dismissed the blatant injuries inflicted on her horse, Sammy, and tried to insinuate the animal had died from an illness. The injuries to the horse consisted of a right eye removed, left eyelid only removed, the tongue was missing, and the genitals were removed. There was virtually no blood on the animal or around the surrounding area, except a small amount on the carcass, and some inside the mouth, and again a small amount seeps with the right eye socket where the animal was moved. Okay, next one, thanks. This is a follow-up. The vet said the horse died of colic, but the owner saw the horse had defecated before he died, and the vet said the stomach cavity was empty. This does not correspond to symptoms of colic. The condition of colic in horses is when the stomach twists and cannot allow food to enter the intestine. Something doesn't add up. The injuries to the horse in Devon is supposedly from wild animals. However, the owner of the horse had a friend, a cousin, with him who is a butcher, and he examined the animal and said the cut to the eyelid and penis is a clean cut and does not correspond to any known animal. The owner's father asked for a second opinion regarding the cause of death. The local vet got very angry and abusive. I mean, that's disgusting, isn't it? The father contacted a second vet to do a necropsy, but discovered the vet had disposed of the animal without his permission. So they got rid of the evidence. When the police were initially called to the incident, they informed the family not to take any photos as they would deal with it, and are now obstructed and refusing to pass copies on to the family. They have now had to file a Data Protection Act and wait 40 days for release of the photos of their own horse from the police. The vet said the horse was ill but did not know how it died or what it died of. The vet was called out to the scene, and the RSPCA and the police were already on site. That often happens. People ring the RSPCA and they're often the first to get there. So they are also a dodgy outfit on this problem, and they have operatives who are in the loop. So they collude into hiding the truth and putting the animal owner off and not offering evidence from their own animal, which is again appalling. The media don't talk about this aspect, Okay, thanks, Sandra. Now, this is Mike Freebury with his wife at the 2016 was it? Yeah, conference. And Mike gave a talk, and he produced his book Killers on the Moor, which is very good. So he decided to break away from the APFU and do his own thing, and he accidentally picked a media report up about the 1977 horse mutilations on Dartmoor, and there's 15 horses actually. So he dug into the archives and got all this information, so he thought he'd look at this. And as he started going around to Devon, he sought help from the local farmers, and they've got a very close-knit community of farmers, like an association. And one farmer, a lady who was like heads up this outfit called Mary Alford, and it took a while for Mike to get her confidence, and he was invited to their internal meetings and whatever, and a lot more recent dead sheep came up to his notice as a result of that. So I helped him spend some time reading his manuscripts, his various chapters as he knocked them out to me and posted them off to me for comment. And he asked me, can I put some of your material in the book, which he has. So it's doing very well. It took him a long time. But the main thing is, typical of Mike, you know, gets a grip, he filed a Freedom of Information onto the Devon and Cornwall police to get their photographs of mutilated sheep, and they declined. And the argument was, you know, people will see these, they'll do copycat killings, and you know, it's crime scene stuff and not for your eyes. So he batted away for 2 years, Mike, corresponding with the Information Commissioner, which is in Knutsford near Stockport, not far off where their office is. And the police kept objecting, and it was toing and forward, each side putting their argument why they would not release the pictures. And in the end, the commissioner, the Information Commissioner, agreed to favour Mike's request. So the police had to give up these images. I think there's one next one. Thank you. Oh, that's his book, and this is a historical photograph taken by a guy. He does a name in his book and the media. And this is one of the ponies, and you see it's lying in a bit of a stream, and the skull, state of the skull, is typical of the mutilation. Okay, there might be a bit of decay as well, but the fleece is there. So he decided to use that on the cover of his book. Okay, thanks a lot. And this is one of the police photographs, and there were all sorts of strings attached when they released these photographs that he couldn't bandy them about. It was for his eyes only, which is a bit pointless. If you file a Freedom of Information, you want the freedom to use the information you fought for. Haven't you, for 2 years? So, but Mike was very worried to show these, even to me, initially. So I picked one of the 6 because apart from the marvellously clean jaw bones, there's a beautiful circular clean hole here just into the bone. Now if you keep that in your memory, because I'm going to show you images later on a seal in Vancouver and other animals, that hole there. So that's one of the police pictures. No, okay. Thanks. Right. Now, in the farmyard, I think it's Mary Alford took this picture. I think Mike was there at the time, and they brought a sheep in from the moor, and obviously it had a bit of blood running out of its eye hole here. But you'll notice there's probably 300 or 400 dead flies here. So what residual effect is there on that sheep's body to kill all the blowflies that settle on a corpse to lay their eggs? And there they are, all dead in the base of the truck. So that's another mystery and a clue that, you know, there's some effect, bad effect for flies. So, okay, thanks. Now then, I'm going to come to this case shortly with all these sheep piled up here, and this was a title for my book I never finished writing. That's my shame. And Richard D. Hall's twisted my arm a few times and said, you must get on with it and I'll help you. And so I played around with this picture to make it look a bit more horrific and put the title in. So I gave him a title up to Richard for his documentary we did together. That's it. Okay. Yes. Here I am with Richard in a couple of years back at Holmfirth. Okay. Thank you. Now, if you've seen Silent Killers, you'll have seen this image, and it was a very good idea of Richard to put this in. So with my help, we picked some of the animal shots, and he put the views in to show, you know, the main areas of attack, if you like. So, like they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words, and I thought I did work very well. Okay. Now, Richard went to a place called Prudhoe, which is again near Consett in County Durham. As the crow flies, it's probably no more than 1.5 miles from Hall Farm at Whittenstall, where the lady had the sheep dead with the lamb's head removed from the vulva, which we interviewed her on the BBC programme we just watched. So you often find that you get mutilations in a very close area to a previous one. Sometimes the same farm is done again and again. So there's 2 calves, pictures of a bit of shadow, but there's a big chunk out here. Something happened at the back end here. I think there's another picture, Andrew, of the other one. Yes, you can see more clearly. All the ribs clean and all the internal organs gone. So that was down to Richard's own research, which he puts, I think, in Silent Killers. Now, a guy up in Rossshire in Scotland contacted us. So it might have come through Richard again, because he's now a focal point for people to send stuff to, because everyone's impressed with the Silent Killers documentary, etc., which is very good. Better than an advert in the farming press at £300 a throw, thanks to Richard D. Hull. Anyway, this is a half sheep, as you can see, the front half. Everything is being cleanly removed except this organ here, which is the lungs. And there was no damage whatsoever to the lung. But all the organs around the lung have been taken out, and the back half of the sheep was never found. So I'm showing that. Bear that in mind when you see some domestic animals later on. Okay. This is just the best thing. I troll the web to find a picture of this chap. But no. He's now emeritus professor of veterinary pathology at Liverpool University. His name is Donald Kelly, and he'd obviously been tipped off or seen for himself one of my adverts in the farming press. And he rang me up and said, will I send him a load of pictures to him? And I declined to do that, and I said, what I can do, I'm willing to come and see you and bring them to you. So he wasn't too happy about that, I don't think, but he agreed, because he was intrigued. So we set up a date, and I went and took Robert Hulse with me. I brought his movie camera, actually, but he didn't set it running while we sat with him, but at least he was an independent witness to what the professor was saying to me. On the phone before we went, he sort of chided me, saying, why am I using a human pathologist to look at the animals, not a veterinary pathologist? So I said, well, I didn't know of a veterinary pathologist to help me. How are you fixed? Backtrack. And he sort of said, oh, well, I might look at a few samples, small tissue samples, but he's going to charge me the going rate. Tony Fremont did everything free of charge, including using all the departments from formaldehyde up, but there you are. Anyway, we get there, and we'd hardly set foot into the meeting room, which was like a sort of bit of a museum with specimens in, bottles, storing all these bits of organs and whatever. And without even hardly looking at first image, I took all the pictures I had, including ones from Tony Dodd. I took one of Linda Moulton Howe's books, flipped through that, and he was saying constantly, it was like a machine, oh, it was natural predation, it's natural predation. And it was like talking to this wall here, natural predation. And he finally, we're literally packing up to leave, as we're going through the door, he said, oh, okay, some of the images you showed me don't seem to be natural predation. And then he said, oh, I've got a friend who's the head veterinary chap at Barton Hall premises, laboratories. I think you should speak to him. Now, I didn't tell him I'd had a nasty phone call from one of this chap's staff, anyway, unfortunately, I think it was his intervention. They got onto Tony Fremont and warned him off. So there we are. Okay, next one, thank you. Oh, so natural predation. Professor, this is natural predation by dogs. What a mess. I mean, it's chalk and cheese, isn't it? And here is a professor of veterinary pathology trying to say these surgical cuts of pictures we showed him are natural predation. Because he just couldn't have it, you see. He had to put us off. He thinks, well, what do we know about animal pathology or anything? Okay, so that's not a very nice slide. Okay, next one. Oh, well, anyway, at last we found the culprits. Found the bloody culprit. Here he is. The wolf in sheep's clothing. So now I know who it is. It's not a fox, it's the wolf in sheep's clothing. Right, thank you. Very difficult to put humour in this sort of topic, isn't it? Now, this is the Forest of Dean. A wildlife photographer called David Ward came across this fox on a pathway crossing through the forest of Dean, and he took 3 images. And I found out about it because of some article in a wildlife magazine, and he was contributing. So eventually, through the editor, he agreed to get in touch, and he agreed to phone me, and he sent me these images. There's obviously something happened to the head here through the skull. Okay, thanks, Andrew. But what's interesting is what's happened to the brush. Okay, there's another picture close up. And all the joints in the tail completely stripped of all muscle, flesh, the fur, everything. So that's what a foxtail like, and I think there's possibly something happened there in the rectum area, but I couldn't be sure. So there you go. So that's a fox done another fox. Are you foxed? I'm foxed. Right. So here actually is the Forest of Dean, and the fox was about there in 2011. Now this massive case of 35 sheep, or 22 dead to start with, is here at Wollaston, the farm. But the sheep were actually at a place called Stroat, where the farmer had rented another farmer's field. They often do that when that's what the grass gets short. So it's 13th of October 02, Shepstow, where we're going to eventually with the veterinary place, and across the river, about a mile away, is Albury-on-Severn Nuclear Power Station. Now the field, I think if I use the aerial, I think it's satellite pictures, Andrew, there's a footpath, and there's a railway track here, which is a busy line, and there's a strip of grass field on the estuary for the sheep to be on, and they're all there, and that's where they were found. So there we are. Okay. So I set off. Oh, here's some of them again. The farmer put on this pallet. This one had nothing wrong with it. As the farmer said, he thinks it's died of shock, because sheep are very easy. They'll do that by fright. The heart will stop. Anyway, I rang him up. Oh, first of all, I was tipped off about this case by Alan Foster. You know of Alan Foster? Yeah, super chap. He knew what I was up to. So on the local television from Bristol, the ITV and the radio, there had been a fair big coverage of this because it was lots of sheep. And Alan happened to pick up on it. He rang me up, told me about it, what he knew, what on the media. So I rang the ITV studios in Bristol and prized out of them the farmer's telephone number. So I rang him up, his name's Willie Guest, and said, I'm interested in this, for telling him we're looking into these sort of problems. Had any of the 22 sheep lost their tongues? He said, no idea, I haven't looked. He said, I'll go and have a look and ring you back. Now, honestly, I didn't expect him to ring back. But within half an hour, and it's this one here, with a jaw strip, he said, yeah, there's one there. How the hell did I know that? 200 odd miles away in Manchester, that one of his sheep hasn't got a tongue. So I impressed him. So he said, I'd organise a digger to come the following morning to dig a big hole and bury them all. So he said, if you want to come, you better get here fast. So we left at 5 o'clock in the morning, and bless him, Robert Hulse agreed to come with me, and we set off, and he brought his video camera with him. He took a bit of footage, which is in one of Rich's silent killers, isn't it? Yeah. Yep, so okay, we got there. Next slide. This is Willie Guest. We both look very concerned, don't we? This is a clip from Robert's film, so it's a bit grainy. So he was telling me what had happened, and there was 35 sheep actually affected, but some were still alive. And one, he had to shoot it 3 times to kill it actually, because it got this terrible injury down its nose, which I'll show you in a sec. And then he said, having conversations, and I mentioned I was suspicious about the proximity of the nuclear power station, which was quite an old one. In fact, they were getting ready to run it down and close it. And I reckon they'd had a leak. It was kept quiet, because him and a lot of relatives had this notification that they might have to take iodine tablets. So in other words, the members of the public had been affected by radiation leaks from the power station. Not a word in the media about that. They kept that quiet, didn't they? Anyway, carry on, next one. Yes. And this is the close-up of the sheep with the tongue missing. It's a bit messy, but nevertheless, the jaw is stripped off. Okay, next one. Now this is where the sheep were. In fact, where we took this picture, there's still quite a few there. There's the power station, and this is the railway track. And there's a bit of a walk from the main road across a couple of farmers' fields and the footpath to get to the crossing to get into here. And next slide, I think, Andrew. Blow it up a bit. There's the power station, so you can see how close it is. So I reckon these sheep, if the human beings in the area have been affected and had to take iodine tablets, they weren't feeding in the bloody sheep, were they? But so I think upstairs we're looking for contamination of the ground and the animals, because that's what they're monitoring partly, the health of us people on Earth and the animals of the Earth. That's my belief. We went there, 3 sheep stuck in the ditch in a dike. So we went back to the farm to tell them, because it was end of the year and they were up to the feet in this muddy cold water, so they couldn't get out of this steeply banked ditch. So the farmer said, "Oh, thanks very much, I'll get a tractor and pull them out." Anyway, this sheep was interesting because unfortunately his farm dog had a chew at this and made a mess. Again, looks like jaw strip, but there's a very straight line down from its top of its head to its nose, practically 1/4 of an inch wide, like a machine cut, or a saw, a chainsaw or something, circular saw, cut a slot, and the sheep was alive but still breathing through the slot in its nose. So he had to shoot it 3 times to put it out of its misery. But there you go. Okay. There's another one looked at, and there was a strip of tongue off again at an angle, had little penetrating holes around the skull. All the damage was the head end. Nothing wrong with the back end or the sexual organs. It was all the head, 22 of them. Now, when we went back to tell you about the 3 sheep stuck in the mud, 2 CID officers had appeared. Previously, Willie Guest said the RSPCA had been there, a big cat expert, a fellow called Danny Bamping, who heads up a big cat organisation, who decided it was not big cats, and he buggered off. And the RSPCA couldn't offer anything. And he said, "Oh, the police are not interested." And all of a sudden, the police got interested. There's 2 CID officers there. So we met them. And then the vet appeared, Jane Glover Hill, and I think it might be a couple more inches before the part. Yeah, the lower jaw area, places that Linda Moulton Howard picked going under the skin. Okay, next one. I've not used all these pictures because I had to cut down a lot. So this lady had come in her car to the farm with a big knife and cut off 3 of the heads of the ewes, and then she picked a whole ewe, which is very heavy with the fleece on. So I helped her into the car boot to get in, because she couldn't manage it on her own. Meantime, Robert is rabbiting to the 2 CID guys, filling them in about what we were about. And they didn't seem phased, Robert said, they seemed to take on board what we were saying. But why they were interested, someone had suggested guns had been used. And the guys with dogs had walked down the busy railway line in the middle of the night, and the farmer said the weather was atrocious, bucketing down all night, nearly 12 hours. He said, I wouldn't have gone out there, as a shepherd, if you like, never mind anyone with guns and danger of passing trains, in the dark. So because somebody senior in the police had said to the officers, have you checked for pellets? So that's why we're there, and that's why they commissioned the vets to come and examine for gunshots. Okay, next one. This is a couple of the radiographs, and that's the thicker bone. So lead or anything is very opaque, is absorbed by the radiation, and we show up very clearly. So there was no bullets. As soon as the police were told there was no evidence of gunshot, they just were not interested anymore. Okay, next one. This is Jane Glover Hill here on the left, and this last was from Australia, you know, doing some training and working in the UK, and they were marvellous. I mean, it was a tremendous opportunity to go there. In fact, you have a smile at this. It shows you this is 95. This was 2002, was it?
Yeah, 2002.
She said, as she's working, she said, "Just think we might be doing our first alien autopsy." She said that. I'm not bullying. And Robert didn't have his camera running to capture that, but there you go. Right, next one. There's another one of them working. Okay. Now this is one of the heads. Now you'll see this object, which is, I think just nothing more special than a knitting needle. But she found, apart from these wounds, there was 2 holes on each side of the head. If you look at that lamb I picked up, but they were a bit bigger, about 1/2 inch diameter, into the skull. But they were blind holes. They didn't go all the way through. They were just opposite like that. So she managed. This is behind the brain tissue, at the top of the skull. She managed to force this. The next slide is the close-up. I zoomed in a bit. It's the same one. That right through from one side to the other, to show how they align. So in her report, she postulated that some sort of clamping device had been put on the head of the sheep, which had perhaps sharp points and dug in to perhaps hold it in position while they did whatever they were doing. Don't know, we'll ever know, but there we go. I'm going a bit hoarse anyway. Now this is in Dublin. There's 3 images of this horse. I don't know any details of whereabouts in Dublin it was, but this typical hole which we see again and again. But you know that the harness thing is still there, and they've worked underneath it. So what do you think of that? Yeah. Okay. Next one. Back end cord out. That's the hole in its head there we've seen. Okay. And it's obviously got a hole in the chest here, and there's a hole in its belly, and the distending intestines pushing its way out with the gases, as they do, I suppose. Okay, right. This is a completely different horse. This is in Cornwall. I should have noted the date. I'm interested in the date, but it's the horse was in Dublin, May 2013, but the horse is more recent. I haven't put it on my list stupidly. Okay, thanks. Well, there was three areas there. She turned it over, and the leaves on the ground is stuck to the flesh. This is a young Dartmoor pony, the southwest of Dartmoor, taken by the Equine Society. So the young lady kindly sent me her pictures. So these are like feral ponies, really. They don't belong to anybody. And this is July 2013. A close-up of all the sexual organs out, testicles. This is intestine coming out. Okay, thanks. Eyes cleanly removed. Now the tongue is not removed; it's still there. I think. Did I put a closer view in? I can't remember. No, I didn't. Anyway, there's a piece taken out of the tongue in this instance. Now this is a horse called Honey in a place called Cayton in Leicestershire in 2015, September 7th, and she contacted Richard, I think, initially. So these are her pictures, but it's got the eyes out, this same wound as the horse in Dublin, and the jaw. Okay, next one. No, this is on the other side, whole eye, jaw. Okay. And that's just a close-up she took of the hole. Now then, one of the features we found in that horse, and the one we went to from the conference later on in September from Holmfirth, we shot off Richard and I on the Sunday afternoon, because we heard from Claire Watts, her name is, a friend had got a male horse, only a farm a couple of miles from hers, who had been done, and he was going for a post-mortem on the Monday morning, 9 o'clock. So we left the conference and decided to skip a lecture or two. I think one was Dave Hodgins, and off we went, but it's worth it anyway. These things called chestnuts, no one knows really. It's some primordial thing from the past with horses. They're on all four legs, more or less the same position, like knobbly things. Sometimes when someone's showing a horse, they will file it down, make it smooth and look nice for the show. But that's it. So what purpose they are, I have no idea. Okay, that was just a demonstration. So the male horse we went to, which was in a van, a bit tight, it was like a big transit van ready to go when we got there, had got its chestnuts excised off very smoothly to the bone. Okay, another one, I think. Yeah, it's another one. And now it also had one ear cut from the gristle. Well, it's at two levels, the outer skin and the hide, and on this slope, which is very interesting. Okay, and I think there's a goat now. Yeah, I know it's slightly out of focus. This is from Switzerland. There's a chap I'll tell you about in a minute called Joe Fleury, who's become a co-op APFU member. And this is a goat at a farm near where he lives in the centre of Switzerland. And if you note the ear cut, it's almost identical to that horse. Let's see the date. Yeah, 2016, yeah. Okay. And there's a good place to stop in a minute. Here's Richard talking to... Oh, sorry, in a minute, sorry. Go back 2 seconds. This is Claire Watts, who was a horse owner, and she was battling to get the vet report, or it was done by Sutton Bonington Agricultural College, which is part of Nottingham University, on the just into Nottingham from Leicestershire, and the RSPCA had apparently funded this post-mortem and the second horse, which you saw with the ear chopped off. So you're talking about a fair bill there, and the RSPCA are a voluntary organisation surviving mainly on public subscriptions. So I suspect the way this Inspector Andy Bostock was playing around, the money actually comes from some source, a pot of money in DEFRA to refund the RSPCA, that's my belief. Anyway, they kept promising the report, she kept badgering them, they gave all sorts of excuses, stalls, they'd arrested somebody who might be involved, who had a reputation, this young man, in the end they let him go, another case of a false arrest almost, on a pretext. And she was expressing, this was the field where the horse was found, and she was expressing to Richard her discontent and annoyance. Okay, just I think after this shot. Now I got this off the RSPCA's website, and this chap, I hasten to add, is not Andy Bostock, but it's nice an RSPCA man with a horse, just to demonstrate how they often get called to these mutilations, because it's an animal, first thing that comes to people's mind, the RSPCA, they'll help, and they don't very often. So I'm still struggling. So I rang the Sutton Bonington College and spoke to the veterinary, who was an assistant professor of pathology, called Shimon Librot, who's Swiss nationality originally, very clever young lady. I looked at her CV and fantastic. And I wanted to ask her leading questions. Well, first of all, I think I spoke to her twice, if not 3 times. I said, I can't give you the report without Andy Bostock's permission. He's a mere inspector in the RSPCA. There must be hundreds of inspectors rank in the RSPCA. So what powers has he got that others don't, that he wouldn't give up to the horse owner the report? I can understand them refusing me, but not to Claire Watts. So, and then I rang her again after a while and said, could I just ask you certain leading questions like how much blood there was, if any, in the body, for example. And she was very, very polite, but again she said, unless you get permission from Andy Bostock, I can't tell you anything. So, there you go. Yeah, is that a good time to have a break? Yes, I think it is, yeah.
Okay.
We're at time.
Yeah.
Nice one, Dave.
All right, everybody, we'll take a break of maybe about 15 minutes. That's okay for everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah. Come back in about 15 minutes. Thank you very much, Dave, for the moment.